Hello. How's that? Good evening, everyone. My name is Rick Myers. I am the principal at St. Paul's University College, and I'm very pleased to welcome you, on behalf of the college, to the 2017 Stanley Knowles Lecture. I note that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, on land that was granted by the Crown to the Six Nations in 1784. We're pleased to have such a large turnout this evening, and we are especially pleased to have a good number of guests with us from the broader KW community. For those of you who are not familiar with St. Paul's, we are one of 4 university colleges federated with the University of Waterloo. In our residences, we host approximately 250 undergraduate students from all UW faculties and approximately 70 graduate students. Our college is home to the Waterloo Aboriginal Education Center and to Greenhouse, a nationally prominent social innovation incubator. Academically, we partner with the Faculty of the Environment to offer very highly regarded programs in international development. We participate in the delivery of the University of Waterloo's Religious Studies programs, and we also offer courses in Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies. The Stanley Knowles Lecture is funded through an endowment to which many people and corporations contributed, but the primary donor was Robert Kerr, the founder of IMAX. His gift was actually arranged by our then board chair, Mr. Eric Ostrander, who is with us this evening somewhere. I have no idea where because the lights are so bright, but Eric, thank you for your good work. The lecture series has a long and somewhat complicated history. Its original focus was Canadian studies, and for that reason, it was named for one of the most gifted parliamentarians in Canadian history, Stanley Knowles. Once we launched our programs in international development, however, it seemed reasonable to broaden the scope of the lecture. So it is now a lecture in humanitarian service, and we're confident that that is a theme that would have been very close to Stanley Knowles' heart. Over the years, we have hosted a number of distinguished speakers, including, by way of example, Stephen Lewis, Mordecai Richler, Dalton Camp, Michael Jean, and Lloyd Axworthy. So just a couple of quick words about the format for this evening. The presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, and then we've allowed about 15 minutes for a question and answer session with the audience, so be thinking of your questions. We invite you to stay with us afterward for drinks and snacks and conversation out in the lobby. Our guest speaker will be there. We'll be glad to chat with you then. Please note that the presentation is being videotaped and will be posted on YouTube. So if you like it, you can watch it over and over and over again, or you can just recommend it to a colleague or a friend. Finally, let me thank the organizing committee for the lecture, Stephen Lowe, Julia Salvini, Peter Frick, Julia Trudeau, and Kelly Deeks Johnson. So I will now invite Grania Ryder, who is the manager of our international field placements for the International Development Program, to introduce this evening's speaker. Grania.
Good evening, everybody. We're pleased to have Patrick with us tonight. He's an internationally recognized expert and educator on humanitarian technology and innovation. He's a distinguished scholar with a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, a pre-doctoral fellowship from Stanford University, and an MA from Columbia University. Over the past 15 years, Patrick has worked in a number of countries: Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, Liberia, India, the Philippines, Kyrgyzstan, Nepal, Turkey, Morocco, Western Sahara, Haiti, Peru, Vanuatu, Fiji, and Northern Ireland on a wide range of humanitarian projects with the United Nations, Red Cross, World Bank, and others. Patrick serves as the executive director and co-founder of WeRobotics, which scales the positive impact of humanitarian aid, development, and environmental projects through the use of appropriate robotic solutions. These include aerial, marine, and terrestrial robotics. Patrick has also co-founded and co-directed the Harvard Humanitarian Initiatives program on crisis mapping and early warning at Harvard University. He's served as Director of Crisis Mapping at Ushahidi, an African NGO ranked by MIT as one of the 50 most innovative and disruptive companies in the world. Patrick has co-founded the Digital Humanitarian Network with the UN, which has been described as one of the most innovative humanitarian initiatives in the past 10 years. In addition, he co-founded Crisis Mappers, an early pioneer of digital humanitarian action. More recently, in 2013, the UN formally requested he join their humanitarian information management team in the Philippines to support response efforts in the wake of Typhoon Haiyan. Shortly after leaving the Philippines, Patrick founded the Humanitarian UAV Network, which actively promotes the safe, responsible, and effective use of UAVs in humanitarian settings. And in 2015, finally, he spearheaded the World Bank's UAV mission in response to Cyclone Pam, a Category 5 cyclone in the Pacific. And he was later invited to coordinate UAV teams responding to the Nepal earthquakes. So he's a busy man, and we're very pleased to have him with us tonight. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind words and the very warm welcome. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for organizing. I know that organizing these types of events does not happen automatically or overnight, so thank you to everyone who was involved in making this evening happen. And thank you all for choosing to spend your evening here. There's so much else going on in everybody's lives, so I really appreciate you sharing this evening with us here tonight. I think I'll jump straight into it, and I think I'll echo quite a bit of what's been said in some of the conversations I've already had with a number of the co-organizers. The robotics divide is very real, and just like the digital divide is already having dire consequences. And you can just look at the recent string of major disasters. Just over the past few weeks alone, the Category 4, Category 5 cyclones, or hurricanes rather, that swept through the Caribbean. What I found particularly striking and shocking, again, even though it was not necessarily a surprise, was when these hurricanes finally made landfall in the US and across the US, you saw a massive use of robotics, of flying robots, otherwise known as drones, or UAVs, aerial robotics. And just one example of this headline, you see there were about 5,000 drone flights in one city in the US alone to support the humanitarian efforts, to accelerate the relief efforts, and even to save lives. And in contrast, if you look at the Caribbean, and of course in some of the poorer countries, the poorer islands there, you'd be very hard-pressed to even find one example of this kind of technology deployed locally to save lives, to support the humanitarian efforts. So again, the robotics divide is very real, and it's having dire consequences not only in the Caribbean, but in many other regions of the global south. Now, the World Economic Forum refers to this disruptive technology, this emerging technology, as powering the fourth industrial revolution, the next industrial revolution, this rise in autonomous systems or intelligent robotics is absolutely going to reshape and starting to reshape our industries, societies around the world and so on, which is, well, not really actually all around the world. That's actually the problem. It's fine and well if you're in the global north or if you happen to be a multi-billion-dollar company, because if you play your cards right, then you stand to actually make billions out of this next industrial revolution, as Amazon and others are already doing a number of different industries. But if you're in the global south, you don't even have the cards. You're not even at the table. You lose out. And we've seen this already, unfortunately, happen in the past, which can be at the same time instructive. In past industrial revolutions, we have seen divides happening, digital divides and otherwise, divides between those who have access to the technology and those who don't. And we're already seeing that this is a big, big problem. And so what are we going to do about it, right? More importantly. So here's part of the problem here. But what can we do? Are we just going to throw up our arms in the air and just say, okay, well, this is too big, this is too much? How can we possibly make a difference in terms of this growing technology injustice? I'd like to start trying to answer this question with a story. And this story begins on a very specific date, on April 25th in 2015. This is not another hurricane or cyclone. This is actually a satellite image of central Nepal that happened to be rather overcast on that particular day. What happened 35 minutes later, though, had a big impact on the people living in Nepal, but also on what I have done since the earthquake. There was an 8.0 magnitude earthquake that struck just after the 35 minutes from this picture taken. And you can imagine the devastation. Maybe you remember it in the news. To make matters worse, Nepal actually remained cloudy for many days. So we couldn't use any kind of satellite imagery to start having a better understanding as to which areas were more affected, i.e. which areas did we need to prioritize in terms of relief efforts. Now, luckily, or so I thought, underneath the clouds, some drone teams had already mobilized and self-deployed to start taking images and videos, aerial surveys of the disaster damage. And within about a few days of the earthquake, I was asked by the United Nations to help coordinate these teams, which was quite the adventure, and not in a good sense, because what happened was many of these teams for sure were experts in the technology. For example, a number of them were startup companies from Silicon Valley who definitely knew the technology inside out, but, and they meant well, but that's also maybe not enough. They had never worked in disaster response before. They had never worked in Nepal or even in a country like Nepal. They didn't understand the customs, the traditions, the language, the cultural sensitivities, and frankly, caused more harm than good. And not every one of them, I should probably not generalize, but a few really, really did not help at all, to the point where their attitude and cultural insensitivities made it to the government of Nepal, who almost decided overnight to ban all drone flights as a result, which meant that those of us who were using this technology safely and responsibly and ethically were also going to be affected and not able to support the relief efforts. So I call them drone cowboys, because that's exactly how they acted in Nepal. And it's not the first time. Disaster tourists and others have been showing up in disasters, certainly meaning well, and many of them absolutely making a very positive difference. But sometimes it only takes one or two groups to really make it a big problem for everybody else. So here I was, dealing with another disaster in the making, courtesy of these drone cowboys, thinking to myself, this is just the worst. This is not what should be happening. There needs to be a different way to be doing this, and it's only going to potentially become more problematic as more people have access to this technology, which need not be a bad thing. It might create more problems like these. So I was thinking, what if, instead of trying to get these companies to understand how to engage local communities in a way that doesn't insult them, what if we actually worked with local drone pilots, with Nepali drone pilots? They speak the language, they understand the culture, they're going to stay for the course, they're not going to disappear as soon as the media disappears. What if we were in a world where we could actually build that local capacity and have those responders take responsibility? And after all, as we all know, first responders, by definition, are the local responders. That's always been the case and always will be. So why not democratize access to these technologies and enable local responders to leverage these technologies to speed up the response and even save lives? Well, I got the chance to try this out. A few months after the earthquake, I was invited by a number of local Nepali organizations to support their reconstruction and rebuilding efforts in Nepal. And so I thought, okay, I was still, and still am in some respects, scarred by the experience that I had during the first month or two after the earthquake with the circus that was playing in front of me. And so I thought, okay, maybe this is an opportunity to show that there's a different approach here that can be taken. And so I didn't carry out these aerial surveys for these partners. We did this together. I did this with them. My colleagues and I took the time to train our partners on how to use these flying robots, because That's why they're so exciting. The fact that they're robots means you're not manually flying these technologies. You can program them to fly around and take pictures, and that means that you can do a lot more. You can cover a lot more ground. It's not manual work, it's more autonomous kind of work, and it makes all the difference, which is why multi-billion-dollar companies like Amazon and others are jumping into this robotics race, if you'd like. And it's becoming easier and easier, more accessible to program robots. Frankly, it's as easy as drawing a rectangle on your tablet or smartphone in the area you want to fly and basically pressing start. And the drone will take off automatically, fly automatically, take pictures, and land automatically. And then you'll take the SD card out to put the images in your laptop and use software to put all the images together. And then what you have is this very high-resolution map of one of the most devastated areas outside of Kathmandu. And by high resolution, I actually do mean high resolution. You can actually zoom in all the way down to almost the street level, allowing you to really distinguish between the kinds of damage that the earthquake has caused and distinguish between different buildings in a very crowded area, a very dense area. You can't do this with satellite imagery. And of course, if it's cloudy, then there's no satellite images to begin with. In addition, thanks to these flying robots, you can create these high-definition 3D models of disaster-affected areas. And this is helpful because disaster damage happens in 3D. If I only have a picture, what do I know what the house looks like on the other side? Maybe it could be completely damaged, but the front is fine. So having this kind of 360 surround view gives you more information. And I think it's just a matter of time, I'd say in the next year or so, where we're going to see humanitarian organizations and others starting to import this kind of 3D models into a virtual reality environment, so that instead of just looking at one picture, you can actually assess the damage, infrastructure damage from all angles. It sounds like maybe like science fiction, but it's inevitable that this is going to happen, and it's a good thing. At the same time, it's important to have a reality check, because not everybody is going to have access to this kind of technology. Yet again, technology divide. Our partners in Nepal certainly don't even have regular access to smartphones or tablets, let alone computers. So towards the end of this project, we decided, listen, if we just leave this information as digital information, it's going to be locked and it's not going to be accessible to local communities or easily accessible to our partners. We need to find a way to unlock and liberate this data. So what we decided to do was go to a local banner shop and print out all these maps on large rollable banners that we brought right back to the local community so they could see, touch for themselves the result of all this activity with our local Nepali partners. They could actually see their house on these maps. And what was a real highlight for me, one of the biggest highlights for me over the past couple of years, was what happened next when the local partners we were working with said, hey, why don't we take this opportunity, given that literally there were hundreds of members of the local community that were just gathering around, and ask them to identify problem areas or where the debris is, or clean water, or resettlement areas and so on, and have them engage. And the response was just phenomenal. It was beautiful. For half a day, in fact, when we left, people were still talking, annotating the map with their own local knowledge. And what this ended up doing was starting a conversation within the community, by the community, not by Patrick the outsider or the Nepali government official or the cousin of the mayor, but it was a local community itself that was taking ownership of this map and of their own local knowledge and starting to discuss between them, what are we going to do now? What do we prioritize in terms of the rebuilding and the reconstruction? What strategies should we use? And because we didn't do this on a laptop, which, by the way, what would happen if you were on a tablet and you were trying to show maps around, you'd have a bunch of men, a dozen men around you looking at the map for 20 minutes, and that would be it, right? But because we were doing this in the real world, outside in a tangible data kind of way, it meant that more members of the community could actually participate. It was far more inclusive and representative in terms of a dialogue as far as what this community wanted to do in terms of rebuilding their homes and so on. Now, there is a catch, like every story. It's not all perfect. Unfortunately, we missed a really important part of this town called Panga. in our surveys, which was really heartbreaking because of all the work that we put in, and in particular our local partners put in. It was not easy. It was long days. But the silver lining here is that because we had taken the time to train our local partners, and in fact we actually gave them the technology with no strings attached. If they wanted to go drone racing, that was up to them, right? It was about letting go of control and saying, you know what? This is yours. You do what you need to do with it. And as a result, a couple of weeks after we left the country, I get an email saying, oh, by the way, we finished the map. I had no idea. In fact, they went like 2 days after we left the country. They went in, did it on their own, didn't need help, got it done, used the imagery processing software, which is not the easiest to use, and got it done. And for them, it was like, oh, by the way, we finished. And that was for me just that moment of, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do now with this whole earthquake experience that I've had. I've seen the bad and the good and the ugly, if you'd like, and I want to be part of this. And the idea of helping local partners, local champions, help themselves with appropriate robotic solutions was something that really got me quite excited and was a big motivating factor for launching WeRobotics with a number of very good and cherished colleagues and friends of mine, with the idea of saying, you know what, the next time we see a satellite image of a hurricane or a cyclone or something else, or of an earthquake that's about to happen, what if we could be assured that below those clouds there's a local team of robotics or drone pilots that is ready to go, that's already going and being deployed and can do this sensibly, ethically, and responsibly. And so we've ran with this vision over the past year or two, and I wanted to share with you what's possible in terms of localizing this technology, democratizing access of this technology, and trusting others with this technology and letting go of control. What we've done is we've set up local innovation labs. These are we call them flying labs, that are run entirely by the local staff, the local teams, the local champions, who we train and transfer the technology to and so on. But it's not us telling this team, oh, you'll do this, you have to work with them, you have to work on this project. It's actually completely the opposite. They identify the problems, the priorities, they identify the partners, and then they come to us and say, okay, how do we fix this? How do we solve this? How do we use, what kind of robotic solutions should we use? Is robotics even the right technology, or could it in fact be the worst possible technology we could use for this particular problem? And then we do the technology transfer, we do the training on site, and then it's up to them to do what they do best as local champions. They take that technology and move forward with it. Some examples of recent projects. The drone team, the Nepali Flying Labs team, has been using drones for environmental monitoring as well as wildlife monitoring, ecosystems monitoring, in addition to agriculture projects, crop monitoring, and then most recently, disaster preparedness, disaster risk reduction. The earthquake that we just talked about caused about 20,000 landslides in the months and years after. And what's the problem with these landslides is that people are now rebuilding in those areas. And some of those areas are even more dangerous than they were before the landslides. And so we teamed up with a humanitarian organization to create very high-definition 3D models of these giant mountain landslide areas, and then did some more advanced risk modeling and calculations to better understand what are the zones that are particularly dangerous and that these families should be aware of, and then helped in relocating to safer ground. So that's some examples that have come out. This was entirely run by our Nepali team. They're the ones who said, this is a problem, we want to be involved. This is our country, we want to be part of the solution. This is a problem that's close to our hearts. And for better or worse, this is not the only problem, or obviously worse, but what we found is that as our Nepali teams identify new problems, they don't get phased or discouraged. It's contagious. It's so incredible to see. They're like, we can do this. There's this belief and optimism that and determination that this is their country, and if they get the right tools and they get the right education, they are going to work 20-hour days to make a difference. I've described some of the projects that they've done. I'd like to share a project that they're very excited about and that we're hoping to work on next year. The beautiful mountains of the Himalayas are very much being impacted by climate change. The glaciers are starting to melt, and what happens when these glaciers melt is that they start creating glacial lakes. And so you'll see on one of the fastest changing glaciers in Nepal, if you get an aerial image or even a satellite image, you'll see hundreds of dark spots on these glaciers. And these are the glacial lakes that are like cancers for these glaciers. They're eating these glaciers from the inside out. And it's really perverse because the more the ice melts, the more these lakes grow, which further accelerates the melting, and so on and so forth. And what's happening is that these lakes are now starting to form subterranean channels. And so just last summer, over just a 24-hour period, one of these glacial lakes lost enough water to fill not just one giant Olympic-sized swimming pool, but 42 giant Olympic. I mean, it's even hard. I'm trying to give an impression of what that is, but this doesn't do it justice in terms of the volume of glacial, literally ice-cold water that just disappears in 24 hours. And of course, that water is going somewhere else to another lake, which makes that lake flow over or crack open. And the result is incredibly scary. In fact, the villagers who live around these lakes call the result the tsunamis of the Himalayas. Torrent of flash flood, glacial flooding that will just go right through villages. Any time of day. It could be at 3 o'clock in the morning. And they're becoming increasingly prone to these massive flash floods. So scientists like my colleague Juliana, who you'll hear from in a bit, are really racing to better understand how these lakes grow, how they form, and how these cracks actually happen. And is it possible to get early warning signals before these lakes actually lose 42 swimming pool sizes worth of glacial water? And for this, she and her team of Sherpas are using swimming robots. Very similar in many respects to the flying robots. You program these robots to basically do surveys, to map the lake floor. And it's much better that the robots do this because they like it. Looks like a perfectly happy little robot swimming there. But if you were to fall in that water, it is incredibly dangerous. And there are ice falls, there's avalanches on the side of these lakes because of the melting and the increasing temperatures. It's just bad news. You don't even want to try. So this is another example of being able to use appropriate robotic solutions. And what this robot allows you to do is better understand how deep the lake is, to better understand how steep the banks are when it goes underwater, to understand what kind of composite materials the lake is made of, and to potentially try and find some cracks from swimming at the surface, some cracks beneath that could potentially signal really bad news. You can get real-time sonar data, as Juliana explains here.
Here we are looking at the sonar, the depth, the side scan. Pretty cool, yeah, guys?
They're like, yeah, right, we're freezing our butts off. So what we want to do with our Nepal Flying Labs, with Juliana's team of Sherpa scientists, is go back in May, June season of next year, bring diving robots as well, because that allows us to go really to the bottom of these lake floors and find those cracks early on, but also bring some flying robots, because it turns out, having learned a lot from other scientists, that mapping the banks of these lakes in 3D is really important for them to do this kind of modeling that the scientists need to do for early warning and so on. So this is a phenomenal example where using flying, swimming, and diving robots to help digitize the Himalayas and the glacial lakes can make potentially a huge difference to tens of thousands of villagers who live around these glacial lakes. And our approach, again, is to not do this ourselves, but to teach, train, transfer the technology to enable our Nepali colleagues to take the lead in taking the pulse of the Himalayas, taking the pulse of these glacial lakes, and providing the early warnings themselves. Now you're probably all freezing with all this ice and feeling very cold in here, so maybe we'll move to the tropics for a little so we can warm up. To give you a different example of our Tanzanian team and the phenomenal work that they've been doing with flying robots in Zanzibar in particular, using this technology to do environmental monitoring as well as coastal management. They've even started experimenting with monitoring fisheries and marine life. And all our teams at all our flying labs work very closely with local communities. That is such a central component of what we do, engaging, teaching, asking permission, answering questions, and so on. And in a few months, I'll be going to the Seychelles to continue a project we started, doing marine life monitoring, population counts of eels and sharks, creating 3D models of the atolls to better understand how they're shifting due to climate change and whether sea level rise is already having a serious impact in the Seychelles. And that's a great example of a Tanzanian team not only doing good work within their country, but bringing that expertise to their region, not only in the Seychelles, but we've had demand for their expertise from Rwanda, the DRC, Mozambique, Uganda, and Malawi. And that's amazing. That's what should be happening. We're really, really excited by that. And one other anecdote I wanted to share, when I was recently in Zanzibar with Yusuf and Khadija, I was just looking over Khadija's shoulder thinking, like, what in the world is this foil thing on the wing of the drone? I've been doing this for years. I haven't never seen this, and I was trying to figure it out on my own. And after a while, I was like, no, I don't understand. And so I said, Khadija, so what is this foil thing? Well, it turns out that they've had some challenges or problems with birds around Zanzibar who are not particularly amused by having buzzing drones in their territory, and which is completely understandable. They were there first. And so they tried a few different things, and it turns out that this solution works the best. By taping this foil, it's keeping the birds away. I'm not entirely sure what the animal behavioral explanation is, but my guess is they see something shiny and they realize that, wait, birds should not shine. So this is not a bird, I don't know what it is, I better stay away. Maybe that's one explanation. I'm not entirely sure, but it's great to see that this kind of solution is coming from the flying labs themselves, from our local teams. I bet you, just to be, maybe take another shot at Silicon Valley here, that if you had gone to the Bay Area and said, hey, we have a problem with birds and drones, can you find a solution? They'd come up with a solution that costs $200 and requires sensors and goodness knows what, and would break 2 days later, right? This is 5 cents. It's local knowledge, local ingenuity, local solutions. It works. It doesn't have to be sexy. It doesn't have to cost $200. It just works. This is one of the things that gets me so excited by just learning from our own local teams, because they get to share this as well with the other flying labs. Now, speaking of things breaking, robotics, like any other technology, does break. And there's nothing magical about robotics that Murphy's Law does not apply. This was a spectacular crash that I witnessed in person, a little too close for comfort. And it's a problem, right? Because here we are looking to transfer technology that our flying labs need to do projects that they've identified as priorities. But if they break, then what? We're creating dependency. And it's a really, really big problem. So what we started doing is doing some initial training on how to fix these platforms on site within our flying labs. It's not easy because of warranty issues. Because these drone companies say if you tinker, like your iPhone or whatever, if you start tinkering, you lose your warranty, it's done. And so it's going to be a long-term discussion, and we've had some signals from some companies that they're willing to give us some leeway so that some of this technology can be repaired to a certain extent locally. But I think ultimately, I'd like to think we're going to win, because it's in the interest of these companies to have their technology repaired locally. There's an international organization in Tanzania that has a dozen of these platforms, which break or have issues every few months. And you know what they do to fix them? They have to send them back to Europe. The shipping cost of putting this in a FedEx or UPS or whatever is astronomical. I mean, they're losing thousands and thousands of dollars every month by shipping this stuff back. And then it has to get fixed, and it'll take weeks or a month and then shipped back and so on. It's just why, right? And so we've been starting to talk to our flying labs about potentially there being a business opportunity here, right? Clients don't want to have to send their drones back to Switzerland and wait 2 months until they can get them back in order to do their agricultural work. What if the flying labs in Tanzania could become a hub for maintenance, service, and repairs? Frankly, I think there'd be an incredible amount of money there for the flying labs if they cornered that market, not just within Tanzania, but within the region. And part of the mandate of the flying labs, in fact, is to incubate local businesses that offer these kinds of services, robotic services, drones as a service. We've, with our flying labs in Nepal, incubated 4 local startup companies that we're working with and partnering with, and we've been doing the same thing in Tanzania this month, actually. Now, moving to my third and final chapter of the story in terms of democratizing this technology, localizing this technology, and enabling local partners to take the lead, I'll take you to the Amazon rainforest, the Peruvian Amazon rainforest, where our team there has been working with the Ministry of Health to better understand some of the challenges around transportation and delivery of essential medicines and vaccines. There are no roads, let alone highways, in the Amazon rainforest, so you have instead river boats are the main means or modes of transportation. Those can be expensive, they can be very slow, and unreliable. So we started experimenting with very low-cost drones. You see this one, it's completely beaten up. We call it Frankie, after Frankenstein. It's just being held together by duct tape. Again, it doesn't have to be sexy, it just has to work. This was anti-venom that was placed into Frankie. Snake bites are a huge issue, as you can imagine, in the Amazon. And here comes Frankie, after a 40-kilometer flight, coming in for a beautiful landing in a very remote Amazon village called Pampa Hermosa. It took Frankie 35 minutes to deliver the antivenom. It would have taken a boat up to 6 hours. So if you'd been bitten by a snake, do you want to wait 6 hours for the antivenom or 35 minutes? We also did the first ever night flights with Frankie, with a drone ever in the Amazon, delivering blood samples to a local clinic for testing and diagnosis. And we've since done a number of other projects, longer flights, other types of payloads, diagnostic tests, and so on. And it's really, I think, very, very, very promising, especially because our focus is in using technology that can actually be repaired locally and serviced locally. So we're talking to the motor taxi drivers or the tuk-tuk drivers, if you like, because they're mechanics and they fix mechanical stuff. And I think they could be part of the solution in helping to maintain the drones locally as well. When we were in the Amazon, one of the challenges we had was mosquitoes, and that's obviously not only in the Amazon rainforest. Mosquitoes are a huge problem the world over, and Zika is still very fresh in everybody's minds. It's still a major issue, not to mention dengue, malaria, and so on. So we started looking to that to better understand, what was being done about this. Not to suggest that we have a solution that maybe nobody's thought of and that will work, but we were quite curious. And we learned that there were a number of different strategies to try and deal with mosquitoes, but that none of them were really totally effective. And then we came across a whole new area of research and a technique that's been developed over the past couple of years called SIT, Sterile Insect Technique Method. Basically, what scientists and biologists are doing is sterilizing male mosquitoes and then releasing them in the wild, which then decreases the overall population because then the non-sterilized male mosquitoes have more competition. And in some cases, some of these preliminary studies have shown that the overall mosquito population in a hotspot, Zika, dengue, malaria hotspot, will drop by as much as 90%. And that's just astounding, and it seems incredibly promising. There are a lot of advantages in doing this over using insecticides and goodness knows what other kinds of chemicals and so on, which can have other ramifications on the environment. What we then learned was that the way that this is being done, how these mosquitoes are being released, is through by a car or in a pickup truck. So they'll literally take like 1 million mosquitoes, put them in a box, and then drive around and release the mosquitoes. And that way, the idea is that they'll reduce the overall population. The challenge is that roads, if and when they do exist, are not always usable, right? Especially in the countries that we work in, and especially during the rainy seasons. And what happens during the rainy seasons? You have pools of standing water, which is perfect for mosquitoes to breed and multiply. You can't get through this with cars. And it's not just a matter of access and the roads not being usable, but not everybody lives next to a road, as we saw very clearly with the drone projects we've done in the Amazon rainforest. There are people who are isolated, but why should that be a penalty against them for not being able to benefit from this kind of solution that could reduce a lot of mosquito-borne illnesses? So we started to think, well, what if we would complement the ground-based release with the aerial release? What if we did this? And a lot of people said, "You're nuts, you're crazy," as usual. And we said, well, why not? From a technical perspective, yeah, it certainly isn't trivial, but it should not be impossible. So we started doing this, starting this earlier this year with some support from USAID. It's not trivial. You have to be able to program the flights, but not only program the flights, but then control the rates of release. 1,000 mosquitoes every, 100 meters, for example. And it turns out that these mosquitoes, they're obviously leading cause of death around the world, but ironically, they're incredibly fragile. And if you're trying to put 100,000 or 1 million of these mosquitoes in a box, they're going to kill each other. It's just guaranteed. They're just going to go nuts. So that is not helpful. And so what we've had to do is chill the mosquitoes. We kind of have to get them to a certain temperature that they kind of a bit stoned and not really knowing what's going on so that they behave for a while. So that allows us to put about 100,000 or more mosquitoes in a release mechanism that we've had to develop from scratch. Then we have to put that on the drone, and then we have to fly the drone. And then it turns out that really these mosquitoes are quite delicate because some of them will get injured as they get released as well. So that doesn't help either, because if they don't survive, then they don't help to reduce the much larger population of mosquitoes. And there's another, this is Mission Impossible. I wish I had the background music with this, but there's another challenge, is that we have to make sure that as they are released from 200 meters, 400 feet up in the air, that they have enough time to get over their deep freeze, stoned kind of status and wake up and fly away before they hit the ground, right? So not trivial, and Mission Impossible music playing, but that's what we're up against. And this is actually a video I got from Adam, my fellow co-founder, this morning. A first generation version of the prototype where they're trying to make sure that the release mechanism is talking to the software and the drone and so on. So we're getting there slowly but surely. The plan is to do this live test in Peru with the Ministry of Health in November. The biggest challenge right now that we have is actually not technical. It's our partners are having a hard time breeding enough male mosquitoes and sterilizing them by November so that we can actually do the live test. But just to give you a completely different example of some of the work that we're doing at our different labs, this time in Peru. To close up, our labs are not islands. They're very much connected with each other. We've already brought the different teams together in person at a global meeting we had hosted by the Rockefeller Foundation in New York. They're sharing best practices, they're sharing lessons learned, they're collaborating remotely. What we want to do next, though, is more than just remote collaboration. The Ministry of Health is really keen on having our Peru flying labs do some work in Cusco, which is a very mountainous area, in beautiful mountains in Peru. But our Peruvian team hasn't really worked in mountainous areas. You saw the Amazon rainforest is incredibly flat. And working in high altitude mountainous areas is, you talk to our Nepali team, can be a real pain. But they've really learned a lot over the past year or two, and what we would love to do is bring our Nepali team to Peru for a few weeks so that they do the capacity building, because they've learned a heck of a lot, and they were the ones who are doing this, right? We're doing the remote support, but they've been there, they're actually doing the hard work. So really helping to enable this kind of direct south-to-south capacity building within this network. And our plan for next year is to add 3 more labs: Panama, which will cover Central America, Senegal flying labs, which will cover West Africa, and then South Pacific. A regional lab will most likely be based in Fiji with the university there. And then connecting all of these and really leveraging that network effect so that you have not only a democratization of the technology available locally by local trained experts and teams who are at the forefront of using these technologies in really challenging environments. Not on a beautiful day in Washington, D.C., or New York, or Paris, or London, with no wind and blue skies and so on, right? But in the Himalayas, or in the Amazon rainforest, or in the tropics, the coastal environments of islands in the South Pacific. That learning also needs to be democratized and shared between these flying labs in the Global South. So that is our little part in trying to democratize the 4th Industrial Revolution, and to make sure that the next time we see images like that, we know that a Khadija or a Yusuf or a Uttam or a Juan is there with the technology, with the expertise, with the experience, and they're going to stay the course and do this well in a way that's ethical and also responsible and effective. Now, democratizing the 4th Industrial Revolution is no easy task, and we need all the help we can get. So if any of you wanted to be involved, first of all, you're all more than welcome to visit our flying labs at any time. Open invitation to come and share what you know and learn from our flying labs teams as well, and to bring your expertise. We need all the help we can get. So all kinds of expertise and skill sets will go a very long way. And I know for a fact that having had these discussions with our flying labs teams, they're eager to learn from others at other universities and other countries around the world. So if you wanted to be a part of this crazy adventure, you're more than welcome to join and collaborate with us. And that's basically my story. My favorite part of these is really the discussions and the questions. And not just today, this evening, but please, by all means, feel free to email me, whether that's tomorrow or even a year or 2 years from now, and say, hey, I remember seeing you at the lecture and we talked about this, and I have an idea or I have a question. If I can be helpful, we don't have, by any stretch of the imagination, all or most of the answers. And it's really going to take a diverse group of people with different passions that come together and find solutions to make the world a better place, because that's what it's all about at the end. Thank you very much.
Well, fantastic stuff. So for the question period, this is such a cool room. There are actually microphones over here and over here. You can't see them, but they are there. Why is your hand up? Yeah, there and there is up. So what I would suggest is if you have a question, just come down. We can take turns and go from this side to that side, back and forth. I think that makes it easier for people. And Patrick is looking forward to hearing from you. So who has a question? Come on down. There or there. There we go.
I have a couple of questions about drone cowboys. Sort of, what kind of things were they doing that were troublesome? And also, if you want to be helpful, how do you avoid being a drone cowboy?
Those are great questions. Little story, I did get in trouble with that, using that term at one of our trainings that we were giving in Denmark for humanitarian organizations, because one of the participants was actually a cowboy, an American cowboy with a ranch, right? But also doing humanitarian work. And he was like, I object to this use of the word cowboy, so I should probably not use that word anymore. Oh man, if I just tell you the stories, it's gonna make my blood boil again. But So one of the issues we had was trying to coordinate, which is the hardest thing to do in disaster response. I understand that. And so, for many different reasons, it is a good thing to understand who is doing what where, especially when you're flying drones in an airspace where you're also going to have search and rescue helicopters flying at low altitudes, where you're going to have other kinds of aircraft. It's useful, important to know from a safety perspective where these teams are and where the drones are. And also from an efficiency perspective, making sure that we're not duplicating efforts and that the teams are actually prioritizing the right areas based on the requests we were getting from UNICEF and the World Bank and others. A few of the teams from Silicon Valley got back to me and said, "Oh, no, sorry, we can't provide this information because we have very little connectivity, we can't get online, we can't, cell phone reception, blah, 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 blah." And that is more or less true. It's one of the biggest challenges we had, not just in Nepal, but in many other disasters that we work in. What really got to me, and I think for me that was the camel back straw breaking, was when I went online and I was looking at their Twitter feed, and here they were tweeting live, pictures, videos, and the tweet that really got to me was like, "Don't worry, children of Nepal, we're coming to save you, to rescue you." It's this white savior complex thing that just, I don't know, I was born and raised in Africa, I just cannot deal with that at all. And so that was just, are you kidding me? You're telling me you can't coordinate from a safety perspective and from an efficiency and perspective, but you have plenty of time taking pictures with kids and telling them you're going to save. It's like Indiana Jones kind of. I have no patience for that. And because they weren't bloody coordinating, we had 4 different teams survey the same village within the space of 1 week, to the point that the villagers that I found out from a colleague who did an assessment a month or 2 later were absolutely furious, because none of these teams even bothered to present themselves, to introduce themselves, say why they were here, what they were doing, explain the technology, ask permission. There's a thought, right? And I keep telling these companies ever since Nepal, like, I don't care if you've got legal permission from the Civil Aviation Authority. That does not give you ethical permission to fly over a village, especially one that's been devastated by an earthquake, where many people will almost have lost loved ones, are traumatized, and here you're coming with all your gear and these technologies. If people are not used to them or haven't seen them before, they can be intimidating. That's why we have a code of conduct that we follow for the work that we do. So just a few examples. If you go to my blog, irevolutions.org, I went on a long ranting rampage, which was really toned down, actually. If you Google drone, UAV drones, earthquake, Nepal, it's a sanitized version of how I really feel, but there's more examples there. Thanks for the question.
Hello, there we go. What abilities of drones need to be more developed to be effective? Like battery life, speed, carrying capacity, environmental adaptability, or even just cost, accessibility.
Great questions. Can I say yes to all of the above? More. Cost is a big issue. I think cost needs to be a design parameter. Affordability needs to be a central design parameter. But of course, or maybe not of course, I don't know. The big multi-billion-dollar drone companies are not necessarily thinking about, sure, they don't want to undercut the market and so on, but they're not thinking about affordability, developing countries, remote areas, or durability either. So, say again?
Repairability, for example.
Right?
Building
Exactly.
that in, have it be modular.
Exactly. And simplicity as well. It's just like, we don't need half of the functions that a drone can do, really. It just complicates everything. So I almost want the dumb phone version of drones. Just do one thing, do it well, do it 1,000 times without a problem, press the button, that's it. I don't have to do anything else. But I think affordability is a huge issue, repairability. And the batteries, the longer you can fly, the better. But your question also made me think of something else that I wanted to echo or emphasize is, the real disruption here is not so much drones, right? It's this shift from manually controlled technologies to autonomous intelligent systems. And so, frankly, whether these systems fly, drive, or swim is not the point. It's the fact that they could be made to be more autonomous than ever before. So we're actually starting to talk with some other engineering students about the need for a small autonomous boat that can carry vaccines and medicines, because there's an amazing need for this in archipelago in the Philippines. So, and they were asking us the same question yesterday, like, okay, so what do we design around? Affordability, range, battery life, and so on. So it's important to think about these questions, not just for the flying robots, but also the driving and the swimming robots. I think the answers are going to be similar when we talk about needing to localize this technology in developing countries. And if you wanted to follow up, by all means, email, and we'll continue the conversation. Is there more? Oh, that way. Am I going that way?
My question was, I thought it was very interesting in the videos and pictures that you showed that there's it's a very diverse group of people that are working on this. So there's children, there's elderly people, there's women and everything like that. And I'm wondering if, is there any cultural pushback to having women involved in the tech that you bring to places? Or is it just that everyone kind of gets involved?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. That's a really, really good question. In a way, I wish there was pushback, because it would mean that there would be more women involved in the first place. But like in Nepal, I think the culture of the society is such that out of the 80-plus young people that we've trained, maybe 3 or 4 have been young girls, young women. In Tanzania, you saw Khadija, who's an absolute rock star, and she's a riot. She's so funny. And also the most experienced female drone pilot in East Africa. I mean, she's definitely has more experience flying drones than I have. We were talking about that with her. I think she's got a father that's really supportive. She's quite open about talking about these issues. And she's quite committed to helping other women, young women in Zanzibar and Tanzania, think about this as a potential something to aspire to think about getting into this technology, and so on. So that's really helpful that she's starting to play a role model for other women in Tanzania. But across the board, it's always really very much dominated by men, and that's a function of society, culture, and so on. We're going to hopefully be working with a gender expert who's been working in developing countries for many, many years, especially in Latin America. Because none of us, to be perfectly honest, are experts in this gender, technology access, and so on. And what we want to do with the Pacific Flying Labs that we're going to be starting to work on in March is take a deliberate youth focus to really look at disadvantaged youth and marginalized youth, and with a strong focus on women and girls. And for that, we have the support from the Red Cross, who already work with youth and so on. And so we're hoping to better understand how do we make this more democratized, and what can we learn by working with folks who know about this a lot more than we do in the Pacific, and bring back to our other flying labs. I mean, what would make my day is if we could bring some of these youth from Fiji and Tonga and Vanuatu, and have them go to Tanzania and train other youth there, right? Not only a South-to-South adults collaboration, but youth as well, because let's be honest, they're the future. They are the future drone pilots for public health and humanitarian efforts and so on. But yeah, if you have advice, if you have suggestions, I'm also all ears. If you feel free to email me. Thank you. Thanks for asking. Yes.
Hi. Thank you very much for taking the time to come out here and talk with us tonight. So I work for a local startup company called Robotics, where right now we're trying to work to create a robot for excavating landmines. And my question is, do you have any advice for technology startups like ourselves that are working in the humanitarian sector in terms of how do we attract investors and
Great question. I think I spoke to a fellow co-founder of yours who's in Phnom Penh right now.
Yeah, Richard?
Yes, yeah, I had a great Skype call with him last week.
Oh, okay.
So that was really neat. I was starting to learn about the technology and everything, and we're definitely going to follow up in October, November when you're looking to launch more publicly. I wish I had advice. I've not worked in the private sector or the startup. I've always been on the nonprofit side, and we go after grant funding. But I think there's still maybe some takeaways. I think the earlier you can partner with, what I call the problem owners, right? They're problem solvers and problem owners, identifying those who have the real problems and working with them so that you're developing a solution that actually solves a real problem. So whether that's humanitarian organizations or development organizations, you can get their time and their buy-in if you really are able to propose something that will make a difference for them and the local communities that they work with. I think one of the problems that I've seen most prominently in the US is, and again, the Silicon Valley sort of idea is to just think of a problem that they think is a problem and then engineer a solution without ever talking to the end users or the problem owners. And it happens, it still happens. I was complaining about this 10 years ago, and it still happens. There's no co-creation, co-ideation, co-development at all with the end users, the problem owners. And I can't believe this is still happening. It doesn't work. It just does not work. So, but you guys, I was talking to Richard. He's in Cambodia. He's there. He's learning by doing as well, and talking to the folks who ultimately, I think, would need this technology. So that sounds like really smart to me. That's what I would do.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
When you were talking about the Mosquito project, and I've seen from the other things you talk about the local knowledge, the mosquitoes, as I'm sure you've heard over in Peru or elsewhere, are also an important part of the food chain. So, the mosquito larvae are important for the fish, and the mosquitoes are important for birds and bats and other things, which then have their own importance in the natural ecosystem. So when you look at things that might, for example, cut down their population by 90% or something like that, are you also talking to other groups there about, okay, what happens if we intervene and do this? What are the ripple effects throughout the ecosystem of intervening into it like that?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, this is a really important question because it highlights a bigger issue that I also want to mention. We're not going to be the mosquito experts, the dengue experts, the public health experts. We're one team amongst many others. What we do, and we enjoy doing, is bringing together the solution teams because we know exactly what we don't know. And so we need extra help. So with the Ministry of Health and the USAID team in Peru is very active. We actually had to do a risk assessment, an environmental risk assessment, going through those motions as well with folks who, again, frankly, know a lot more about this than we ever will or will ever claim to by any means. So that is part of, for most grants from biggest foundations and donors, you go through a lot of vetting and these kind of risk management, what are they called? I forget what they're called. There's a UN term for it. So that's part of the issue as well. And that's something that needs to be communicated with local communities as well, is talking about the different risks, the unintended consequences and so on, and making sure that they're aware of this and they make an informed decision as to do they want this to happen in their backyard or not. And if they don't, they don't. And that's the end of the story, right? So thanks for asking. I think we have.
Rick, I've just got one more question. In the model you've developed, you've looked at the self.
In the model, what, sorry?
In the model that you've presented, you've looked at the self in relation to inequity relative to the Western world. Yet the Western world, as I sit here in Canada, has inequity in it.
Sure.
Have you investigated applying this concept in the Western world, such as Canada, to resolve issues around inequity?
That's a great question, and it comes up a lot. We get, every other week we'll get an email from an organization. In fact, and I won't remember the specifics, but I can always email it to you. I loved your thoughts on it. It was, I think in Western Canada, there was a group working with local communities living on rather remote, isolated islands. I I believe it was not in the ocean, but in a lake, and they didn't have easy access to medicines and other kinds of important supplies, and they said, we want to do a Canada Flying Labs. And I think the use case was perfect in terms of the technology being the right fit for that particular problem. We're a very small NGO, and our co-founding team has decades of experience in developing countries, in doing aid, development, and public health work. And so that's not necessarily something that we can't do everything. And we've said, you know what, we will work in areas that we understand better. And that'll be for us developing countries. But because of this increasing demand that's coming across multiple countries, and not all the demand is about a flying labs either. What we've done is we started doing some consulting work for different UN agencies and other NGOs and so on. And we've, I think, we're kind of overstretched right now, but it caught my imagination, this idea of working with local communities in very remote parts of Canada. So I'd love to work on it. I just don't know that we have the bandwidth. We're so small. Which, by the way, is why you could join the roster, and then you could take the lead. No, I'm actually not kidding at all. I mean, we'll provide what we can provide as a small team, whether that's some initial training or some technology transfer, and then you're in Canada, we're not, and then but you take the lead. That's a great idea. I think we should do that.
Thank you so much again for the lecture. It was very informative. You kind of just touched on it, but I was wondering, in the wake of a natural disaster or a problem that arises, it's really easy to want to help, but it's really hard to change that into action. I was wondering, for those of us who aren't already a part of a team or like part of someone or an organization that's already helping, how you'd recommend we focus our efforts and change that want to help to actually make it into action that could directly impact them.
That is such a great question, and is what inspired me to write my book, actually, Digital Humanitarians. So I have a lot of advice. I'm going to try and keep this short past, but so there's a group called the Digital Humanitarian Network that I would love for you to check out. Was set up with the UN back in 2012. It's a network of just, I call them superheroes, extraordinary groups of volunteers from all around the world who have different kind of superhero powers, if you like. Some of them work in satellite imagery, so they will literally be asked by the UN to look at satellite images and find roads that are damaged for the UN so that they know how to do logistics, supply chain, delivery of aid, and so on. Others will focus on social media. So there's a group called the Standby Task Force, which is a member of the Digital Humanitarian Network that monitors social media and for reports of damage and needs, and then they'll map that on a crisis map, and they'll share that with the UN. This has all been happening, by the way, over the past few weeks in the Caribbean and following the hurricanes there. So that's a way that is relatively easy to engage, because you can be in your PJs at home and clicking and looking at images and so on, and be connected to a phenomenal global community of people who want to help. And what this Digital Humanitarian Network really serves as is as an interface between digital volunteers and established, formal, professional humanitarian organizations who need all the help they can get. I mean, they are not tech savvy. They're still figuring out what Twitter means. They're just, I love them to bits because many of my friends, colleagues work there. They're also dinosaur-era organizations. Now, this has been changing for the better over the past few years. Now, all of a sudden, innovation and technology is sexy within the UN, so everybody wants to do it, which is great. But they still need a lot of help. They'll never be able to do what the Digital Humanitarian Network can do globally within hours. So that's one area. And you'll find also Translators Without Borders is a member of the Digital Humanitarian Network, and there are always translation needs that humanitarian organizations are going to have, maybe translating tweets or Facebook messages or what have you. So there's a real diverse area of skills and interests that can be represented there. So that's one idea. If you have other interests, do email me, and it takes a village, and so there's a role for you to play in this village. So definitely follow up if you want some more ideas. Yeah, thank you.
Right, if we have no further questions, I'm going to invite Julia Salvini, who is on our lecture organizing committee, to come up and thank Patrick.
I'm going to step by the microphone. Okay. I don't have my own little fancy headset. But thank you so much, Patrick, for your words tonight. They've been informative, but they've been inspiring as well. And I always love this concept of technology as an enabler. And I love the stories that you told us, how you went into these communities with technology and ideas, and they picked up on that and did their own thing and started to solve their own problems. And I always think that's so fascinating, but it's inspiring for the rest of us as well. So thank you very much for your words tonight. We have a small gift for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And would just remind everybody, we welcome you to stay and to join us in the reception area, and Patrick will be here, and we can continue our discussion together and with Patrick, and please do stay and continue the conversation. Thank you.